Welcome to The Explainer. So today we're diving right into a seriously fascinating journey, the evolution of social welfare administration. Now, social work is entirely unique, right? Because its ultimate goal is delivering human services, not maximizing corporate profit. But obviously, to survive and actually help people, it still has to function effectively. So today, we're tracing this incredible narrative shift, moving from old-school management models obsessed with machine-like corporate efficiency, all the way to modern models that prioritize deeply human-centric adaptive systems. Think about it for a second. Are social workers really just cogs in a machine? Well, this question perfectly sets up our core tension. On one hand, agencies absolutely have to manage operational efficiency. They've got tight budgets, strict compliance rules, and they desperately need structure. But on the other hand, they are delivering deeply human, complex services to vulnerable populations. So finding that sweet spot between a well-oiled machine and a compassionate, responsive organization is the central struggle here. To understand how we got here, we're going to trace this shift through three distinct historical management eras: the classical era, the neoclassical era, and finally, the modern era. First up, Era 1, the classical era, or as I like to call it, the era of the machine. Picture the Industrial Revolution. Back then, classical theories essentially viewed organizations as rigid, unfeeling machines. You had Frederick Taylor's scientific management, which was completely obsessed with finding the one best way to perform a task using time and motion studies. Now, to be fair, this focus on standardization brought us vital tools we literally still use today: standardized intake forms, predictable case management workflows, and strict accountability metrics. It definitely helped to process clients efficiently, but it also created a massive philosophical friction point. And here's the rub. When you are dealing with profound issues like trauma, poverty, or community development, treating those complex human problems as just mere tasks to be processed on an assembly line, that feels deeply inadequate. It completely misses the human element of social work. So that friction brings us to Max Weber and his famous concept of bureaucracy. Weber envisioned this rigid hierarchy governed by super strict rules. The upside here? Large-scale government departments absolutely need this hierarchy, so clients aren't treated based on individual biases. You get fairness and consistency. But the massive downside is that this rigid bureaucracy can tragically slow down critical crisis interventions with endless administrative red tape. It ensures fairness for sure, but often at the costly expense of speed. Building on those rigid structures, André Fayol and Luther Gulick came along and formalized the core functions of a manager into a massive acronym you've probably heard of: POSDCORB. That's planning, organizing, staffing, directing, coordinating, reporting, and budgeting. Even though this whole concept was born way back in the classical era, it still remains a foundational, structural blueprint that administrators rely on to allocate grants and organize outreach today. All right, moving right along to Era 2, the neoclassical era, which really marks the human awakening. So reacting directly to all that cold mechanical efficiency, managers finally woke up to the fact that workers aren't just cogs, they are social beings. A massive turning point here was the Hawthorne studies. Elton Mayo discovered that productivity isn't just about economic incentives, it relies heavily on making workers feel valued and like they're actually part of a team. For social work, this was a real game changer. It shifted administrations straight toward participatory management, emphasizing that staff morale and supportive supervision are absolutely vital if you want to actively prevent burnout from secondary traumatic stress. Building off that, we get Abraham Maslow and Douglas McGregor's behavioral theories. McGregor proposed a really famous comparison: Theory X versus Theory Y. Theory X assumes workers are inherently lazy and need strict control. But Theory Y? It assumes workers are naturally self-motivated and actively seek out responsibility. And you know what? Social work administrators overwhelmingly embrace Theory Y. Why? Because social workers naturally enter this field driven by altruism and a deep desire for social justice. Administrators don't need to control them. Rather, they need to act as facilitators who empower their staff and foster professional growth. Which brings us to Era 3, the modern era, where we start viewing the organization as an adaptive organism. Now we're really injecting dynamic energy into the mix. Systems theory tells us that an organization is like a living, breathing ecosystem made of interconnected subunits. You've got your inputs, right, like funding or community volunteers. Then your processes, like counseling. Your outputs, like empowered families. And crucially, continuous feedback loops. An agency doesn't just exist in a vacuum. Administrators must constantly monitor external shifts, like a sudden policy change or an economic downturn, and use that feedback to continuously adjust their internal operations. And because these systems are so incredibly dynamic, contingency theory teaches us something crucial. There is quite simply no single best way to manage. The leadership style you use depends entirely on the unique situation in front of you. For instance, managing a fast-paced disaster relief deployment, that requires a highly directive, centralized command structure, a very classical style. Conversely, if you're launching a long-term advocacy campaign, that requires a highly collaborative, flat structure, more of a neoclassical style. You literally have to adapt to survive. Within this modern, adaptive mindset, we also see the vital integration of feminist and critical theories. This unique approach actively dismantles oppressive hierarchies and prioritizes inclusivity right within the organizational structure itself. It's brilliant because it ensures an agency doesn't inadvertently replicate societal inequalities internally, advocating instead for shared decision-making that perfectly aligns with the agency's external mission of social justice. Finally, let's wrap things up with Section 4, Balancing Efficiency and Empathy. Let's look at how this whole evolutionary puzzle fits together. Back in the classical era, we viewed organizations as a structured machine, focusing heavily on standardized workflows and policy compliance. Then, moving to the neoclassical era, we shifted to seeing them as a social system, focusing on staff supervision and participatory decision-making. And finally, here in the modern era, we view the agency as an adaptive organism, focusing on community feedback loops and strategic pivots. It really is a complete narrative shift from rigid efficiency to human-centered adaptation. As we close out this explainer, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought. As our external environments grow increasingly complex, how will tomorrow's social work agencies adapt to the next major societal shift? I really encourage you to consider how these living, breathing systems are going to continue to evolve to efficiently and empathetically serve humanity. Thanks so much for joining me to explore the incredibly dynamic world of social work administration. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.